Hello, everybody. Welcome in. Where did my chat box go? Here it is. Welcome into... I believe I saw Bryant up there, and Goku, Gray, and Frankie. Welcome in. There she is. Yep, there I am. It has been quite the long day to get here. I am currently getting brutalized by snow. I did a lot of cleaning around the house and shoveled the driveway twice. And it's still covered. But that is not what we're here for. We are here for Edgar Allan Poe. Reading all around. Fuck this. Not snow. Work tomorrow has already closed. The locations are not open. They have said just stay home. And so I'm going to work from home tomorrow. It's going to be boring. I actually genuinely hate working from home with this job because I'd rather be in the lab. I am a lab worker. Give me the lab. Love the lab. But I also don't want to die. So I'll work from home tomorrow. So, all right. We have limited time before my voice gives out. So I'm going to spend it reading instead of talking. The thing about this story, a couple of disclaimers. Please note up there, this story does not reflect the streamer's views. You'd rather work for home? Yeah, I recognize how lucky I am to have a job that I like to go to. The story does not reflect the streamer's views. This story is very dated. There is a dialect that is used that feels much more like minstrel speak than any kind of actual accurate representation of how someone from today's time period would speak, and I do not feel comfortable mimicking that accent, and so I will not. I will do my best to translate from what Poe has turned it into, and we will go from there. I am coming into the middle of a story called The Gold Bug. Long story short, dude finds a bug, doesn't know what's up with the bug, but it's kind of making him act a little bit nuts. And so he's dragged somebody else out along with him. This is a very long story, and it might be the only one we actually get to today. Because I still have about 20 pages to go in it. Very long story. Not being 2025 considerate. I said this last stream. I do believe that media should be preserved in the form that it took at the time. However, I am not going to be the person who tries to mimic it. It is not my place. And I would feel extremely disrespectful speaking in a way that feels almost like mockery. So it being in the book is perfectly fine in my opinion. Me not being disrespectful is what I would prefer. All right. Yes, it is very exaggeratedly I forget exactly what the name of it is. I think the initials are AAVE, African American something English. I'm uneducated and I should have figured out what that V stands for. But yes, it's very exaggerated, very uncomfortable to read. I am not the person who should be narrating that kind of thing. Yes. And that word has the N word has made an appearance. But also the MASSA like pronunciation for like master is also in there, and I'm just like, nope. All right. So with that said, the story does not reflect the streamer's views. I am just going to do it as best as I can and again interpret because he definitely takes liberties. So let us begin. Okay, it ended with him asking, once the bug business is over, is it finally going to be, like, is he finally going to go home and rest? And the Legrand said, yes, I promise. And now let us be off, for we have no time to lose. And that is where we begin. With a heavy heart, I accompanied my friend. We started about 4 o'clock, Legrand, Jupiter, the dog, and myself. Jupiter had with him the scythe and spades, the whole of which he insisted upon carrying, more through fear, it seemed to me, of trusting either the implements within reach of his master than from any excess of industry or complacence. His demeanor was dogged in the extreme, and that deuced bug? Wait, what did I decide deuced was? Anyway, that deuced bug were the sole words which escaped his lips during the journey. For my own part, I had charge of a couple of dark lanterns while Legrand contented himself with the scarabaeus, which he carried attached to the end of a bit of whipcord, twirling it to and fro with the air of a conjurer as he went. When I observed this last plain evidence of my friend's aberration of mind, I could scarcely refrain from tears. I thought it best, however, to humor his fancy, at least for the present, or until I could adopt some more energetic methods with a chance of success. In the meantime, I endeavored, but all in vain, to sound him in regard to the object of the expedition. Having succeeded in inducing me to accompany him, he seemed unwilling to hold conversation upon any topic of minor importance, and to all my questions vouchsafed no other reply than, "We shall see." We crossed the creek at the head of the island by means of a skiff, and ascended the high grounds of the shore of the mainland, proceeded in a northwesterly direction through a tract of country excessively wild and desolate, where no trace of a human footstep was to be seen. Legrand led the way with decision, pausing only for an instant here and there to consult what appeared to be certain landmarks of his own contrivance upon a former occasion. In this manner we journeyed for about 2 hours, and the sun was just setting when we entered a region infinitely more dreary than any yet seen. It was a species of tableland near the summit of an almost inaccessible hill, densely wooded from base to pinnacle and interspersed with huge crags that appeared to lie loosely upon the soil, and in many cases were prevented from precipitating themselves into the valleys below, merely by the support of the trees against which they reclined. Deep ravines in various directions gave an air of still sterner solemnity to the scene. The natural platform to which we clambered was thickly overgrown with brambles, through which we soon discovered that it would have been impossible as to force our way, but for the scythe, and Jupiter, by direction of his master, proceeded to clear a path to the foot of the enormously tall tulip tree, which stood, with some 10 or 8 oaks, upon the level and far surpassed them all, and all other trees which I had then ever seen, in the beauty of its foliage and form, in the wide spread of its branches, and in the general majesty of its appearance. When we reached this tree, Legrand turned to Jupiter and asked him if he thought he could climb it. The old man seemed a little staggered by the question, and for some moments made no reply. At length he approached the huge trunk, walked slowly around it, and examined it with minute attention. When he had completed his scrutiny, he merely said, "Yes, master. Jupe climbs any tree he ever saw in his life." "Then up with you as soon as possible, for it will soon be too dark to see what you're about." "How far must I go up, master?" inquired Jupiter. "Get up the main trunk first, and then I'll tell you which way to go. And here, stop. Take this beetle with you." "The bug, Master Will, the gold bug," he cried, drawing back in dismay. "Why must I tote this bug all way up the tree? Damned if I do." "If you're afraid, Jupe," yikes, "to take hold of a harmless little dead beetle, why, you can carry it up by the string. But if you do not take it up with you in some way, I shall be under the necessity of breaking your head with a shovel." "What's the matter now, master?" said Jupe, evidently shamed into compliance. Always wanting to raise a fuss with me. I was only joking anyhow. Me, afraid of the bug? What do I care for the bug? I am making some major edits here. Here he cautiously took hold of the extreme end of the string, and maintaining the insect as far from his person as circumstances would permit, prepared to ascend the tree. In youth, the tulip tree, or Liriodendron tulipiferum, the most magnificent of the American foresters, has a trunk particularly smooth, and often rises to a great height without lateral branches, but in its riper age, the bark becomes gnarled and uneven, while many short limbs make their appearance on the stem. Thus, the difficulty of ascension in the present case lay more in the semblance than in reality. Embracing the huge cylinder as close as possible, with his arms and knees seizing with his hands some projections and resting his naked toes upon others. Jupiter, after one or two narrow escapes from falling, at length wriggled himself into the first great fork, and seemed to consider the whole business as virtually accomplished. The risk of achievement was in fact now over, although the climber was some 60 or 70 feet from the ground. Gonna get a small water break. Welcome in, Kit, and did I greet you, Frankie? And welcome in, Bryant. I actually had to have a tulip tree removed from my yard. It was really sad. It was such a big, awesome tree. Which way must I go now, Master Will? He asked. Keep up on the largest branch, the one on this side, said Legrand. Jupiter obeyed him promptly, and apparently with but little trouble, ascending higher and higher until no glimpse of his squat figure could be obtained through the dense foliage which enveloped it. Presently his voice was heard in a sort of halloo. How much further do I have to go? How high up are you? Asked Legrand. Ever so far, he replied. Ow! Sorry, foot cramp. Ever so far, he replied. I can see the sky through the top of the tree. Never mind the sky, but attend to what I say. Look down the trunk and count the limbs below you on this side. How many limbs have you passed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've passed 5 big limbs, Master, on this side. Then go 1 limb higher. In a few moments, the voice was heard again, announcing that the 7th limb was attained. Now, Jupiter, cried Legrand, evidently much excited, I want you to work your way out onto that limb as far as you can. If you see anything strange, let me know. By this time, what little doubt I might have entertained of my poor friend's insanity was finally put to rest. I had no alternative but to conclude him stricken with lunacy, and I became seriously anxious about him getting home. While I was pondering upon what was best to be done, Jupiter's voice was heard again. I'm most afraid to venture out upon this limb very far. It's a dead limb pretty much all the way through. Did you say it was a dead limb, Jupiter? Cried Legrand in a quavering voice. Yes, master. It's as dead as a doornail. Done up for certain. Done departed this here life. What in the name of heaven shall I do? Said Legrand, seemingly in great distress. Do? Said I, glad of an opportunity to interpose a word. Why, come home and go to bed. Come now, that's a fine fellow. It's getting late, and besides, you remember your promise. Jupiter, cried he without heeding me in the least, do you hear me? Yes, Master Will. I hear you ever so plainly. Try the wood well, then, with your knife, to see if you think it very rotten. It's rotten, master, sure enough, he replied in a few moments, but not so very rotten as it ought to be. Might venture out a little way on the limb by myself, that's true. By yourself? What do you mean? Why, I mean the bug. It's a very heavy bug. Suppose I drop him down first, and then the limb won't break with the weight of me. You infernal scoundrel, cried Legrand, apparently much relieved. What do you mean by telling me such nonsense as that? As sure as you drop that needle, I'll break your I'll break your neck. Look here, Jupiter, do you hear me? Yes, master, you don't need to holler at me that way. Well, now listen. If you venture out on the limb as far as you think safe and do not let go of the beetle, I'll make you a present of $1 silver as soon as you get down. I'm Gwine, Master Will? He replied very promptly. Almost out on the end now. Out to the end? Here fairly screamed Legrand. Do you say you are out to the very end of that limb? Soon to be the end, master. Ooh. Lord Golamarcy, what is this here upon the tree? Well, cried Legrand, clearly delighted. What is it? Why, it's nothing but a skull. Somebody left their head up in the tree, and the crows have gobbled every bit of the meat off. A skull, you say? Very well. How is it fastened to the limb? What holds it on? Sure enough, master, must look. Why, this very curious circumstance, upon my word. Here's a great big nail in the skull that fastens it to the tree. Well now, Jupiter, do exactly as I tell you, do you hear? Yes, master. Pay attention then. Find the left eye of the skull. That's good. Why, there's no eye left at all. Curse your stupidity. Do you know your right hand from your left? Yes, I know that. I know all about that. It's my left hand that I chop wood with. To be sure, you are left-handed, and your left eye is on the same side as your left hand. Now, I suppose you can find the left eye of the skull, or the place where the left eye has been. Have you found it? Here there was a long pause. At length, Jupiter asked, Is the left eye upon the same side of the left hand as the skull, too? Because the skull doesn't have a bit of a hand at all. Never mind. Got the left eye now. Here's the left eye. What must I do with it? Let the beetle drop through it as far as the string will reach, but be careful and not let go of your hold of the string. All that's done, Master Will. Mighty easy thing to put the bug through the hole. Look out for him there below. During this colloquy, no portion of Jupiter's person could be seen, but the beetle which he had suffered to descend was now visible at the end of the string, and glistened like a globe of burnished gold in the last rays of the setting sun, some of which still faintly illuminated the eminence upon which we stood. The scarabaeus hung quite clear of any branches, and, if allowed to fall, would have fallen at our feet. Legrand immediately took the scythe and cleared with it a circular space 3 or 4 yards in diameter, just beneath the insect, and having accomplished this, ordered Jupiter to let go the string and come down from the tree. Driving a peg with great nicety into the ground at the precise spot where the beetle fell, my friend now produced from his pocket a tape measure. Fastening one end of this at that point of the trunk of the tree, which was nearest the peg, he unrolled it till it reached the peg, and thence farther unrolled it in the direction already established by the 2 points of the tree and the peg, for the distance of 50 feet. Jupiter clearing away the brambles with the scythe. At the spot thus attained, a second peg was driven, and about this, as a center, a rude circle about 4 feet in diameter described. Taking now a spade himself and giving one to Jupiter and one to me, Legrand begged us to set about digging as quickly as possible. To speak the truth, I had no especial relish for such amusement at any time, and at that particular moment would willingly have declined it, for the night was coming on, and I felt much fatigued with the exercise already taken. But I saw no mode of escape, and was fearful of disturbing my poor friend's equanimity by a refusal. Could I have depended, indeed, upon Jupiter's aid, I would have had no hesitation in attempting to get the lunatic home by force. But I was too well assured of the old man's disposition to hope that he would assist me, under any circumstances, in a personal contest with his master. I made no doubt that the latter had been infected with some of the innumerable southern superstitions about money buried, and that his fantasy had received confirmation by the finding of the scarabaeus, or perhaps by Jupiter's obstinacy in maintaining it to be a bug of real gold. A mind disposed to lunacy would be readily led away by such suggestions, especially if chiming in with favorite preconceived ideas. And then I called to mind the poor fellow's speech about the beetle's being the index of his fortune. Upon the whole, I was sadly vexed and puzzled, but at length I concluded to make a virtue of necessity, to dig with a good will, and thus the sooner to convince the visionary by ocular demonstration of the fallacy of the opinions he entertained. The lanterns having been lit, we all fell to work with a zeal worthy a more rational cause, and as the glare fell upon our persons and implements, I could not help thinking how picturesque a group we composed, and how strange and suspicious our labors must have appeared to any interloper who by chance might have stumbled upon our whereabouts. We dug very steadily for 2 hours. Little was said, and our chief embarrassment lay in the yelpings of the dog, who took exceeding interest in our proceedings. He at length became so obstreperous that we grew fearful of his giving the alarm to some stragglers in the vicinity. Or rather, this was the apprehension of Legrand. For myself, I would have rejoiced at any interruption which might have enabled me to get the wanderer home. The noise was at length very effectually silenced by Jupiter, who, getting up out of the hole with a dogged air of deliberation, tied the brute's mouth up with one of his suspenders, and then returned with a grave chuckle to his task. When the time mentioned had expired, we had reached a depth of 5 feet, and yet no sign of any treasure became manifest. A general pause ensued, and I began to hope that the farce was at an end. Legrand, however, although evidently much disconcerted, wiped his brow thoughtfully and recommenced. We had excavated the entire circle of 4 feet diameter, and now we slightly enlarged the limit and went to the further depth of 2 feet. Still, nothing appeared. The gold seeker, whom I sincerely pitied, at length clambered from the pit with the bitterest disappointment imprinted upon every feature and proceeded slowly and reluctantly to put on his coat, which he had thrown off at the beginning of his labor. In the meantime, I made no remark. Jupiter, at a signal from his master, began to gather up his tools. This done, and the dog having been unmuzzled, we turned in profound silence towards home. We had taken perhaps a dozen steps in this direction when, with a loud oath, Legrand strode up to Jupiter and seized him by the collar. The astonished man opened his eyes and mouth to the fullest extent, let fall the spades, and fell upon his knees. "You scoundrel!" said Legrand, hissing out the syllables from between his clenched teeth. "You infernal villain! Speak, I tell you! Answer me this instant without prevarication! Which is your left eye?" "Oh, my golly, Master Will, isn't this here my left eye for certain?" roared the terrified Jupiter, placing his eye upon his right organ of vision and holding it there with a desperate pertinacity, as if in immediate dread of his master's attempt to gouge. "I thought so! I knew it! Hurrah!" vociferated Legrand, letting him go, and executing a series of curvets and caracals, much to the astonishment of his valet, who, arising from his knee, looked mutely from his master to myself, and then from myself to his master. "Come, we must go back," said the latter. "The game's not up yet." And he led again the way to the tulip tree. "Jupiter," said he when he reached its foot, "come here. Was the skull nailed to the limb with the face outward, or the face to the limb?" "The face was out, master, so the crows could get at the eyes without any trouble." "Well then, was it this eye or that through which you dropped the beetle?" Here Legrand touched each of Jupiter's eyes. "It was this eye, master, the left eye, just as you told me, and here it was his right eye that he indicated." "That will do. Must try it again." Here my friend, about whose madness I now saw, or fancied that I saw, certain indications of method, removed the peg which marked the spot where the beetle fell, to a spot about 3 inches to the westward of its former position. Taking now the tape measure from the nearest point of the trunk to the peg, as before, and continuing the extension in a straight line to the point of 50 feet, a spot was indicated, removed by several yards from the point at which we had been digging. Around the new position, a circle somewhat larger than the former instance was now described, and we again set to work with the spades. I was dreadfully weary, but scarcely understanding what had occasioned the change in my thoughts. I felt no longer any great aversion from the labor imposed. I had become most unaccountably interested, nay, even excited. Perhaps there was something amid all the extravagant demeanor of Legrand, some air of forethought or of deliberation which impressed me. I dug eagerly, and now and then caught myself actually looking, with something that very much resembled expectation for the fancied treasure, the vision of which had demented my unfortunate companion. At a period when such vagaries of thought most fully possessed me, and when we had been at work perhaps an hour and a half, we were again interrupted by the violent howlings of the dog. His uneasiness, in the first instance, had been evidently but the result of playfulness or caprice. But now he assumed a bitter and serious tone. Upon Jupiter's again attempt to muzzle him, he made furious resistance, and, leaping into the hole, tore up the mold frantically with his claws. In a few seconds he had uncovered a mass of human bones, forming 2 complete skeletons intermingled with several buttons of metal and what appeared to be the dust of a decayed woolen. 1 or 2 strokes of a spade upturned the blade of a large Spanish knife, and as we dug further, 3 or 4 loose pieces of gold and silver coin came to light. At these, the joy of Jupiter could scarcely be restrained, but the countenance of his master wore an air of extreme disappointment. He urged us, however, to continue our exertions, and the words were hardly uttered when I stumbled forward and fell, having caught the toe of my boot in a large ring of iron that lay half buried in the loose earth. We now worked in earnest, and never did I pass 10 minutes of more intense excitement. During this interval, we had fairly unearthed an oblong chest of wood, which, from its perfect preservation and wonderful hardness, had plainly been subjected to some mineralizing process, perhaps that of the bichloride of mercury. If I'm not mistaken, that's dangerous stuff. This box was 3.5 feet long, 3 feet broad, and 2.5 feet deep. It was firmly secured by the bands of wrought iron, riveted and forming a kind of open trellis work over the whole. On each side of the chest near the top were 3 rings of iron, 6 in all, by means of a firm hold which could be obtained by 6 persons. Our utmost united endeavors served only to disturb the coffer very slightly in its bed. We at once saw the impossibility of removing so great a weight. Luckily, the sole fastenings of the lid consisted of 2 sliding bolts. These we drew back, trembling and panting with anxiety. In an instant, a treasure of incalculable value lay gleaming before us. As the rays of the lantern fell within the pit, there flashed upwards a glow and a glare from a confused heap of gold and of jewels that absolutely dazzled our eyes. I shall not pretend to describe the feelings with which I gazed. Amazement was, of course, predominant. Legrand appeared exhausted with excitement and spoke very few words. Jupiter's countenance wore, for some minutes, as deadly a pallor as it is possible, in the nature of things, for any man's visage to assume. He seemed stupefied, thunder-stricken. Presently he fell upon his knees in the pit, and burying his naked arms up into the elbows in gold, let them remain, as if enjoying the luxury of a bath. At length, with a deep sigh, he exclaimed as in a soliloquy, this all came because of that gold bug. The pretty gold bug. The poor little gold bug. I don't know what boost is supposed to mean in that savage kind of style. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Me? Answer me that. It became necessary at last that I should arouse both master and valet to the expediency of removing the treasure. Water. It was growing late, and it behooved us to make exertion, that we might get everything housed before daylight. It was difficult to say what should be done, and much time was spent in deliberation, so confused were the ideas of all. We finally lightened the box by removing 2/3 of its contents, when we were enabled, with some trouble, to raise it from the hole. The articles taken out were deposited among the brambles, and the dog left to guard them with strict orders from Jupiter, neither, upon any pretense, to stir from the spot nor to open his mouth until our return. We then hurriedly made for home with the chest, reaching the hut in safety, but after excessive toil at 1 o'clock in the morning. Worn out as we were, it was not in human nature to do more immediately. We rested until 2 and had supper, starting for the hills immediately afterward, armed with 3 stout stacks, which, by good luck, were upon the premises. A little before 4 we arrived at the pit, divided the remainder of the booty as equally as might be among us, and, leaving the holes unfilled, again set out for the hut, at which, for the second time, we deposited our golden burdens, just as the first faint streaks of the dawn gleamed from over the treetops in the east. We were now thoroughly broken down, but the intense excitement of the time denied us repose. After an unquiet slumber of some 3 or 4 hours' duration, we arose, as if by preconcert, to make examination of our treasure. The chest had been full to the brim, and we spent the whole day and the greater part of the next night in a scrutiny of its contents. There had been nothing like order or arrangement. Everything had been heaped in promiscuously. Having assorted all with care, we found ourselves possessed of even vaster wealth than we had at first supposed. In coin, there was rather more than $450,000, estimating the value of the pieces as accurately as we could by the tables of the period. There was not a particle of silver. All was gold of antique date and of great variety, French, Spanish, and German money, with a few English guineas and some counters, of which we had never seen specimens before. There were several very large and heavy coins, so worn that we could make nothing of their inscriptions. There was no American money. The value of the jewels we found more difficulty in estimating. There were diamonds, some of them exceedingly large and fine, 110 in all, and not one of them small. 18 rubies of remarkable brilliancy, 310 emeralds, all very beautiful, and 21 sapphires with an opal. These stones had all been broken from their settings and thrown loose in the chest. The settings themselves, which we picked out from among the other gold, appeared to have been beaten with hammers, as if to prevent identification. Besides all this, there was a vast quantity of solid gold ornaments, nearly 200 massive finger and earrings, rich chains, 30 of these, if I remember, 83 very large and heavy crucifixes, 5 gold censers of great value, a prodigious golden punch bowl, ornamented with richly chased vine leaves and bacchanalian figures, with 2 sword handles exquisitely embossed, and many other small articles which I cannot recollect. The weight of these valuables exceeded 350 pounds, avoirdupois, and in this estimate I have not included 197 superb gold watches, 3 of the number being worth each $500, if one. Many of them were old, and as timekeepers valueless, the works having suffered more or less from corrosion, but all were richly jeweled and in cases of great worth. We estimated the entire contents of the chest that night at $1.5 million, and upon the subsequent disposal of the trinket and jewels, a few being retained for our own use, it was found we had greatly undervalued the treasure. When, at length, we had concluded our examination and the intense excitement of the day had in some measure subsided, Legrand, who saw that I was dying with impatience for a solution of this most extraordinary riddle, entered into a full detail of the circumstances connected to it. "You remember," said he, "the night when I handed you the rough sketch I had made of the Scarabaeus. You recollect also that I had become quite vexed at you for insisting my drawing resembled a death's head. When you first made this assertion, I thought you were jesting, but afterward I called to mind the peculiar spots on the back of the insect and admitted to myself that your remark had some little foundation, in fact. Still, the sneer at my graphic powers irritated me, for I am considered a good artist, and therefore when you handed me the scrap of parchment, I was about ready to crumble it up and throw it angrily into the fire." "The scrap of paper, you mean?" said I. "No, it had much the appearance of paper, and at first I supposed it as such, but when I came to draw upon it, I discovered at once to be a piece of very thin parchment. It was quite dirty, you remember. Well, as I was in the very act of crumpling it up, my glance fell upon the sketch at which you had been looking, and you may imagine my astonishment when I perceived, in fact, the figure of a death's head just where, it seemed to me, I had made the drawing of a beetle. For a moment I was much too amazed to think with accuracy. I knew that my design was very different in detail from this, although there was a certain similarity in general outline. Presently I took a candle, and seating myself at the other end of the room, proceeded to scrutinize the parchment more closely. Upon turning it over, I saw my own sketch upon the reverse, just as I had made it. My first idea now was mere surprise at the really remarkable similarity of outline, at the singular coincidence involved in the fact that, unknown to me, there should have been a skull upon the other side of the parchment immediately beneath my figure of the Scarabaeus, and that this skull, not only in outline but in size, should so closely resemble my drawing. I say the singularity of this coincidence absolutely stupefied me for a time. This is the usual effect of such coincidences. The mind struggles to establish a connection, a sequence of cause and effect, and being unable to do so, suffers a species of temporary paralysis. But when I recovered from this stupor, there dawned upon me gradually a conviction which startled me even more than the drawing. I began distinctly, positively, to remember that there had been no drawing upon the parchment when I made my sketch of the Scarabaeus. I became perfectly certain of this, for I recollected turning it up first one side and then the other in search of the cleanest spot. Had the skull been there, of course, I could not have failed to notice it. Here was indeed a mystery, which I felt it impossible to explain. But even at that early moment, there seemed to glimmer faintly within the most remote and secret chambers of my intellect a glow-worm-like conception of that truth which last night's adventure brought so magnificent a demonstration. I arose at once, and putting the parchment securely away, dismissed all further reflection until I should be alone. While you had gone, and when Jupiter was fast asleep, I betook myself to a more methodical investigation of the affair. In the first place, I considered the manner in which the parchment had come into my possession. The spot where we discovered the Scarabaeus was on the coast of the main land, about a mile upward of the island. But a short distance above high water mark. Upon taking my hold of it, it gave me a sharp bite, which caused me to let it drop. Jupiter, with his accustomed caution before seizing the insect, which had flown towards him, looked about him for a leaf, or something of that nature by which to take hold of it. It was at this moment that his eyes and mine also fell upon the scrap of parchment, which I then supposed to be paper. It was lying half buried in the sand, a corner sticking up. Near the spot where we found it, I observed the remains of the hull of what appeared to be a ship's longboat. The wreck seemed to have been there for a very great while, for the resemblance to boat timbers could scarcely be traced. Welcome in Conway or even Topi. Well, Jupiter picked up the parchment, wrapped the beetle in it, and gave it to me. Soon afterward, we turned to go home, and on the way met Lieutenant G. Blank. I showed him the insect, and he begged me to let him take it to the fort. Upon my consenting, he thrust it forthwith into his waistcoat pocket, without the parchment in which it had been wrapped, and which I had continued to hold in my hand during his inspection. Perhaps he dreaded my changing my mind, and thought it best to make sure of the prize at once. You know how enthusiastic he is on all subjects connected with natural history. At the time, without being conscious of it, I must have deposited the parchment into my own pocket. You remember that when I went to the table for the purpose of making a sketch of the beetle, I found no paper where it was usually kept. I looked in the drawer and found none there. I searched my pockets, hoping to find an old letter, when my hand fell upon the parchment. I thus detail the precise mode in which it came into my possession, for the circumstances impressed me with a peculiar force. No doubt you will think me fanciful, but I had already established a kind of connection. I had put together two links of a great chain. There was a boat lying up a sea-coast, and not far from the boat was a parchment, not a paper, with a skull depicted upon it. You will, of course, ask, where is the connection? I reply that the skull, or death's head, is the well-known emblem of the pirate. The flag of the death's head is hoisted in all engagements. I have said that the scrap was parchment, and not paper. Parchment is durable, almost imperishable. Matters of little moment are rarely consigned to parchment, since for the mere ordinary purposes of drawing or writing it is not so nearly well adapted as paper. This reflection suggested some meaning, some relevancy in the death's head. I did not fail to observe also the form of the parchment. Although one of its corners had been by some accident destroyed, it could be seen the original form was oblong. It was just such a slip indeed as might have been chosen for a memorandum, for a record of something to be long remembered and carefully preserved. But, I interposed, you say that the skull was not upon the parchment when you made the drawing of the beetle. How then do you trace any connection between the boat and the skull, since this latter, according to your own admission, must have been designed, God only knows how or by whom, at some period subsequent to your sketching the scarabaeus? Hereupon turns the whole mystery. Although the secret at this point I had comparatively little difficulty in solving, my steps were sure and could afford but a single result. I reasoned, for example, thus. When I drew the scarabaeus, there was no skull apparent upon the parchment. When I had completed the drawing, I gave it to you, and you observed narrowly until you observed you narrowly until you returned it. You, therefore, did not design the skull, and no one else was present to do so. Then it was not done by human agency, and nevertheless, it was done. At this stage of my reflections, I endeavored to remember, and did remember with entire distinctness, every incident which occurred about the period in question. The weather was chilly, oh, rare and happy accident, and a fire was blazing upon the hearth. I was heated with exercise and sat near the table. You, however, had drawn a chair close to the chimney. Just as I placed the parchment in your hand, and as you were in the act of inspecting it, Wolf, the Newfoundland, entered and leaped upon your shoulders. With your left hand you caressed him and kept him off, while your right, holding the parchment, was permitted to fall listlessly between your knees and in close proximity to the fire. At one moment I thought the blaze had caught it and was about to caution you, but before I could speak you had withdrawn it and were engaged in its examination. When I considered all these particulars, I doubted not for a moment that heat had been the agent in bringing to light upon the parchment the skull which I saw designed upon it. You are well aware that chemical preparations exist and have existed time out of mind by which it is possible to write either upon paper or vellum so that the characters shall become visible only when subjected to the action of fire. Zaffra digested in aqua regia and diluted with 4 times its weight of water is sometimes employed. A green tint results. The regulus of cobalt dissolved in spirit of niter gives a red. These colors disappear at longer or shorter intervals after the material written upon cools, but again become apparent upon the reapplication of heat. I now scrutinized the death's head with care. Its outer edges, the edges of the drawing nearest the edge of the vellum, were far more distinct than the others. It was clear that the action of the caloric had been imperfect or unequal. I immediately kindled a fire and subjected every portion of the parchment to a glowing heat. At first, the only effect was the strengthening of the faint lines in the skull, but upon persevering in the experiment, there became visible, at the corner of the slip, diagonally opposite to the spot in which the death's head was delineated, the figure of what I had first supposed to be a goat. A closer scrutiny, however, satisfied me that it was intended for a kid. Huh, said I. To be sure, I have no right to laugh at you. $1.5 million of money is too serious a matter for mirth, but you are not about to establish a third link in your chain. You'll find any special connections between your pirates and a goat. Pirates, you know, have nothing to do with goats. They appertain to the farming interest. But I have just said that the figure was not that of a goat. Well, a kid, then. Pretty much the same thing. Pretty much, but not altogether, said Legrand. You may have heard of one Captain Kidd. I at once looked upon the figure of the animal as a kind of punning or hieroglyphical signature. I say signature because its position upon the vellum suggested this idea. The death's head at the corner diagonally opposite had in the same manner the air of a stamp or seal, but I was sorely put out by the absence of all else, of the body to my imagined instrument, of the text for my context. I presume you expected to find a letter between the stamp and the signature? Something of that kind. The fact is, I felt irresistibly impressed with a presentiment of some vast good fortune impending. I can scarcely say why. Perhaps, after all, it was rather a desire than an actual belief. But do you know that Jupiter's silly words about the bug being of solid gold had a remarkable effect upon my fancy? And then the series of accidents and coincidences. These were so very extraordinary. Do you observe how a mere accident it was that these events should have occurred upon the sole day of all the year in which it has been, or may be, sufficiently cool for fire, and that without the fire, and without the intervention of the dog at the precise moment in which he appeared, I should never have become aware of the death's head, and so never the possessor of the treasure. But proceed, I am all impatience. Well, you have heard, of course, the many stories current, the 1,000 vague rumors afloat about money buried somewhere upon the Atlantic coast by Kidd and his associates. These rumors must have had some foundation, in fact, and that the rumors have existed so long and so continuous could have resulted, it appeared to me, only from the circumstances of the buried treasure and still remaining entombed. Had Kidd concealed his plunder for a time and afterward reclaimed it, the rumors would scarcely have reached us in their present unvarying form. You will observe that the stories told are all about money seekers, not about money finders. Had the pirate recovered his money there, the affair would have been dropped. It seemed to me that some accident, say the loss of a memorandum indicating its locality, had deprived him of the means of recovering it, and that this accident had become known to his followers, who otherwise might have never heard that the treasure had been concealed at all, and who, busying themselves in vain, because unguided, attempts to regain it, had given first birth and then universal currency to the reports which are now so common. Have you ever heard of any important treasure being unearthed along the coast? Never. But that Kidd's accumulation were immense, it is well known. I took it for granted, therefore, that the earth still held them, and you will scarcely be surprised when I tell you that I felt hope nearly amounting to certainty that the parchment so strangely found involved a lost record of the place of deposit. But how did you proceed? I held the vellum again to the fire, after increasing the heat, but nothing appeared. I now thought it possible that a coating of dirt might have something to do with the failure, so I carefully rinsed the parchment by pouring warm water over it, and having done this, I placed it in a tin pan, with the skull downward, and put the pan upon a furnace of lighted charcoal. In a few minutes, the pan having become thoroughly heated, I removed the slip, and to my inexpressible joy, found it spotted in several places with what appeared to be figures arranged in lines. Again, I placed it in the pan and suffered it to remain another minute. Upon taking it off, the whole was just as you see it now. Here Legrand, having reheated the parchment, submitted it to my inspection. The following characters were rudely traced in a red tint between the death's head and the goat. Lots of numbers. A double cross, a single cross, parentheses, asterisk, semicolon. And is there anything that I haven't listed off yet? Oh, dash, question mark, and a regular colon. If Poe feels so much more appropriate in winter. Need fireplace? Oh, you need fireplace? There we go. If you are interested in exactly what the symbols are, the gold bug is in public domain, and you can look it up yourself anywhere online, I am sure. But, said I, returning him the slip, I am as much in the dark as ever. Were all the jewels of Golconda awaiting me upon my solution of this enigma, I'm quite certain I should be unable to earn them. And yet, said Legrand, the solution is by no means so difficult as you might be led to imagine from the first hasty inspection of the characters. These characters, as anyone might readily guess, form a cipher. That is to say, they convey a meaning. But then, from what is known of Kidd, I could not suppose him capable of constructing any of the more abstruse cryptographs. I made up my mind at once that this was of a simple species. Such, however, as would appear to the crude intellect of the sailor, absolutely insoluble without the key. And you really solved it? Readily. I have solved others of an abstruseness 10,000 times greater. Circumstances, and with a certain bias of mind, have led me to take interest in such riddles, and it may well be doubted whether human ingenuity can construct an enigma of the kind which human ingenuity may not, by proper application, resolve. In fact, having once established connected and legible characters, I scarcely gave a thought to the mere difficulty of developing their import. In the present case, indeed, in all cases of secret writing, the first question regards the language of the cipher. For the principles of solution, so far especially as the more simple ciphers are concerned, depend upon and are varied by the genius of the particular idiom. In general, there is no alternative but experiment, directed by probabilities, of every tongue known to him who attempts the solution, until the true one be attained. But with the cipher now before us, all difficulty was removed by the signature. The pun upon the word kid is appreciable in no other language than the English. But for this consideration, I should have begun in my attempts with the Spanish and French, as the tongues in which a secret of this kind would most naturally have been written by a pirate of the Spanish Main. As it is, I assumed the cryptograph to be English. You observe there are no divisions between the words. Had there been divisions, the task would have been comparatively easy. In such cases, I would have commenced with a collation and analysis of the shorter words, and had a word of a single letter occurred, as is most likely A or I, for example, I should have considered the solution as assured. But, there being no division, my first step was to ascertain the predominant letters, as well as the least frequent. Counting all, I constructed a table thus. Of the character 8, there are 3, semicolon, 26, 4, 19. Double cross, parenthesis. Double cross and parenthesis, 16. Asterisk, 13. 5, 12, 6, 11. Single cross and 1, there are 8. 0, there are 6. 9 or 2, 5. Colon and 3, 4. Question mark, 3. Parenthesis, paragraph symbol, 2, dash, 1. Now, in English, the letter which most frequently occurs is E. Afterward, the succession runs thus. A, O, I, D, H, N, R, S, T, U, Y, C, F, G, L, M, W, B, K, P, Q, X, Z. E predominates so remarkably that an individual sentence of any length is rarely seen, in which it is not the prevailing character. Here, then, we have a guess in the very beginning, the groundwork for something more than a mere guess. The general use which may be made of the table is obvious, but in this particular cipher we shall only partially require its aid. As our predominant character is 8, we shall commence by assuming it as the E of the natural alphabet. To verify the supposition, let us observe if the 8 be seen often in couples, for E is doubled with great frequency in English. In such words, for example, as meet, fleet, speed, seen, been, agree, etc. In the present instance, we see it doubled no less than 5 times, although the cryptograph is brief. Let us assume 8, then, as E. Now, of all the words in the language, the is the most usual. Let us see, therefore, whether there are not repetitions of any 3 characters in the same order of collocation, with the last of them being 8. If we discover repetitions of such letters so arranged, they will most probably represent the word the. Upon inspection, we find no less than 7 such arrangements, the characters being semicolon 4, 8. We may therefore assume that semicolon represents T, 4 represents H, and 8 represents E, the last being now well confirmed. Thus, a great step has been taken. Also, welcome in, Piper. Sorry, forgot about that. But having established a single word, sorry, mental amusement, can't explain. But having an established word, we are enabled to establish a vastly important point, that is to say, several commencements and terminations of other words. Let us refer, for example, to the last instance but one, in which the combination 048 occurs, not far from the end of the cipher. We know that the semicolon immediately ensuing is the commencement of a word, and of the 6 characters succeeding the, we are cognizant of no less than 5. Let us set these characters down, thus, by the letters we know them to represent, leaving a space for the unknown. T space EETH. Here we are enabled at once to discard the TH as forming no portion of the word commencing the first T. By experiment of the entire alphabet for a letter adapted to the vacancy, we perceive that no word can be formed of which this TH can be a part of. We are thus narrowed down to T space EE. And, going through the alphabet if necessary, as before, we arrive at the word tree as the sole possible reading. We gain thus another letter, R, represented by left semicolon, or left parenthesis, with the words the tree in juxtaposition. Is there a typo? Hold up. So that's interesting, because in the cipher that was listed, left parenthesis is not there. Right parenthesis is, and both are used in the letter itself, but left parenthesis is not in the constructed cipher table. We thus gain another letter R, represented by left parenthesis, with the words the tree in juxtaposition. Looking beyond these words for a short distance, we again see the combination semicolon 4, 8, and employ it by way of termination to what immediately precedes. We thus have this arrangement. The tree, semicolon 4, left parenthesis, double cross, question mark 3, 4, the. Or substituting the natural letters where known, it reads thus. The tree, THR, double cross, question mark 3, H, the. Now, if in place of the unknown characters we leave blank spaces or substitute dots, we read thus. The tree, the. When the word through makes itself evident at once. But this discovery gives us 3 new letters, O, U, and G, represented by double cross, question mark, and 3. Looking now narrowly through the cipher for combinations of known characters, we find not very far from the beginning this arrangement. 8-3 left parenthesis 8-8 or agree, which plainly is the conclusion of the word degree, which gives us another letter, D, represented by single cross. 4 letters beyond the word degree, we perceive the combination semicolon 4-6, left parenthesis, semicolon 8-8. Translating the known characters and representing the unknown by dots before we read thus. TH dot RTEE. An arrangement immediately suggestive of the word 13, and again furnishing us with two new characters, I and N, represented by 6 and asterisk. Referring now to the beginning of the cryptograph, we find the combination 5-3 double cross, single cross. Translating as before, we obtain dot good, which assures us that the first letter is A, and that the first 2 words are A good. It is now time we arrange our key as far as discovered in a tabular form to avoid confusion. It will stand thus. Five represents A, cross D, 8E, 3G, 4H, 6I, asterisk N, double cross O, left parenthesis R, semicolon T. We have therefore no less than 10 of the most important letters are presented, and it will be necessary to proceed with the details of the solution. I have said enough to convince you that ciphers of this nature are readily soluble, and to give you some insight into the rationale of their development. But be assured that the specimen before us appertains to the very simplest species of cryptograph. It now only remains to give you the full translation of the characters upon the parchment as unriddled. Here it is. A good glass in the bishop's hostel in the Devil's Seat, 41 degrees and 13 minutes northeast and by north, main branch 7 limb, east side, shoot from the left eye of the Death's Head, a beeline from the tree through the shot 50 feet out. But, said I, the enigma still seems as in bad a condition as ever. How is it possible to extort a meaning from all this jargon about devil's seats, death heads, and bishops' hostels? I confess that the matter still wears a serious aspect when regarded with a casual glance. My first endeavor was to divide the sentence into the natural division intended by the cryptographist. You mean to punctuate it? Something of that kind. But how was it possible to effect this? I reflected that it had been a point with the writer to run his words together without division to increase the difficulty of solution. Now, a not over-acute man in pursuing such an object would be nearly certain to overdo the matter. When, in the course of his composition, he arrived at a break in his subject which would naturally require a pause, or a point, he would be exceedingly apt to run his characters at this place more than usually close together. If you will observe the MS, in the present instance, you will easily detect 5 such cases of unusual crowding. Acting upon this hint, I made the division thus. A good glass in the bishop's hostel in the Devil's Seat. Dash. 41 degrees and 13 minutes. Dash. Northeast and by north. Dash. Main branch 7th limb east side. Dash. Shoot from the left eye of the Death's Head. Dash. A beeline from the tree through the shot 50 feet out. Even this division, said I, leaves me still in the dark. It also left me in the dark, replied Legrand, for a few days, during which I made diligent inquiry in the neighborhood of Sullivan's Island for any buildings which went by the name of the Bishop's Hotel, for example. Of course, I dropped the obsolete word hostel. Gaining no information on the subject, I was on the point of extending my sphere of search and proceeding in a more systematic manner when one morning it entered my head quite suddenly that this bishop's hostel might have been some reference to an old family of the name Besop, which, time out of mind, had held possession of an ancient manor house about 4 miles to the northward of the island. I accordingly went over to the plantation and reinstituted my inquiries among the older men of the place. At length, one of the most I might actually just have to substitute that maybe for slaves of the place. At length, one of the most aged of the women said she had heard of such a place as Aesop's Castle, and thought she could guide me to it, but it was not a castle nor a tavern, but a high rock. I offered to pay her well for her trouble, and after some demur, she consented to accompany me to the spot. We found it without much difficulty. When dismissing her, I proceeded to examine the place. The castle consisted of an irregular assemblage of cliffs and rocks, of the latter being quite remarkable for its height as well as its insulated and artificial appearance. I climbed to its apex, and then felt much at a loss as to what should be done. While I busied in reflection, my eyes fell upon a narrow ledge in the eastern face of the rock, perhaps a yard below the summit upon which I stood. This ledge projected about 18 inches, and was not more than a foot wide, while a niche in the cliff just above it gave a rude resemblance to one of the hollow-backed chairs used by our ancestors. I made no doubt that this here was the devil's seat alluded to in the MS, and now I seemed to grasp the full secret of the riddle. The good glass, I knew, could reference nothing but a telescope, for the word glass is rarely employed in any other sense by seamen. Now here, I at once saw was a telescope to be used, and a definite point of view admitting no variation from which to use it. Nor did I hesitate to believe that the phrases 41 degrees and 13 minutes and northeast by north were intended as directions for leveling the glass. Greatly excited by these discoveries, I hurried home, procured a telescope, and returned to the rock. I let myself down to the edge and found that it was impossible to retain a seat upon it except in one particular position. This fact confirmed my preconceived idea. I proceeded to use the glass. Of course, the 41 degrees and 13 minutes could allude to nothing but elevation above the visible horizon, since the horizontal direction was clearly indicated by the words northeast and by north. This latter direction I at once established by means of a pocket compass. Then, pointing the glass at nearly an angle of 41 degrees of elevation as I could do it by guess, I moved it cautiously up or down until my attention was arrested by a circular rift or opening in the foliage of a large tree that overtopped its fellows in the distance. In the center of this rift I perceived a white spot, but could not at first distinguish what it was. Adjusting the focus of the telescope, I again looked, and now made it out to be a human skull. Upon this discovery, I was so sanguine as to consider the enigma solved, for the phrase main branch, seventh limb, east side could only refer to the position of the skull upon the tree, while shoot from the left eye of the death's head admitted also of but one interpretation in regard to a search for a buried treasure. I perceived that the design was to drop a bullet from the left eye of the skull, and that a bee line, or in other words a straight line, drawn from the nearest point of the trunk through the shot, or the spot where the bullet fell, and thence extended to a distance of 50 feet, would indicate a definite point. And beneath this point, I thought it at least possible that a deposit of value lay concealed. All this, I said, is exceedingly clear, and although ingenious, still simple and explicit. When you left the bishop's hotel, what then? Why, having carefully drawn the bearings of the tree, I turned homeward. The instant that I left the devil's seat, however, the circular rift vanished, nor could I get a glimpse of it afterward, turn as I would. What seems to me the chief ingenuity in this whole business is the fact, for repeated experiment has convinced me it is a fact, that the circular opening in question is visible from no other attainable point of view than that afforded by the narrow ledge upon the face of the rock. In this expedition to the bishop's hotel, I had been attended by Jupiter, who had no doubt observed for some weeks past the abstraction of my demeanor, and took especial care not to leave me alone. But on the next day, getting up very early, I contrived to give him the slip, and went into the hills in search of the tree. After much toil, I found it. When I came home at night, my valet proposed to give me a flogging. While the rest of the adventure, I believe you are with the rest of the adventure, I believe you are as well acquainted as myself. I suppose, said I, you missed the spot in the first attempt at digging through Jupiter's stupidity and letting the bug fall through the right instead of the left eye of the skull. Precisely. This mistake made a difference of about 2.5 inches in the shot, that is to say, in the position of the peg nearest the tree, and had the treasure been beneath the shot, the error would have been of very little moment. But the shot, together with the nearest point of the tree, were merely 2 points for the establishment of a line of direction. Of course, the error, however trivial in the beginning, increased as we proceeded with the line, and by the time we had gone 50 feet, threw us quite off the scent. But my deep-seated impressions that treasure were here somewhere actually buried But for my deep-seated impressions that treasure here somewhere actually buried, we might have had all our labor in vain. But your grandiloquence and your conduct in swinging the beetle, how excessively odd. I was sure you were mad. Why did you insist upon letting fall the bug instead of a bullet from the skull? Why, to be frank, I felt somewhat annoyed by your evident suspicions touching my sanity, and so resolved to punish you quietly in my own way by a little bit of sober mystification. For this reason I swung the beetle, and for this reason I let it fall from the tree. An observation of yours about its great weight suggested the latter idea. Yes, I perceive. And now there is only one point which puzzles me. What are we to make of the skeletons found in the hole? That is a question I am no more able to answer than yourself. There seems, however, only one plausible way of accounting for them, and yet it is dreadful to believe in such atrocity as my suggestion would imply. It is clear that Kidd, if Kidd indeed secreted this treasure, which I doubt not, it is clear that he must have had assistance in the labor. But, this labor concluded, he may have thought it expedient to remove all participants in his secret. Perhaps a couple of blows with a mattock were sufficient, while his co-adjusters were busy in the pit. Perhaps it required a dozen. Who shall tell? Okay, that was amusing towards the end. Very, very amusing. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I am not quite sure I have another 8 pages in me, and that is the amount that the next story is. So I think we might call it good here. We finished the gold bug. We got through 20 more pages. Next Sunday, I am not going to be reading Edgar Allan Poe. I'm going to have a karaoke. After that, I want to probably... Yes, I can get through quite a few of them tomorrow, or not tomorrow, 2 Sundays from now. I doubt I'll get through 40 pages, but we shall see. Typo or another mystery? I actually genuinely think it was a typo or like a misprint. Because in nowhere in that cipher was that symbol found, but we will never know, I suppose. Maybe the internet would have picked it up. I don't know. Something to look into if I really feel the need to know. But for now, I will wish you all good night. It is cold and snowy here, and I think that I'm just going to curl up for the night, maybe with a fun game, and talk to you later. See you tomorrow when I scare the pants off of myself with a heart rate monitor and 5 Nights at Freddy's. Yay! All right. Good night, everybody. Have a wonderful start to the week. I will see you all later. Bye.